96% of Yak-3 fighters in this regiment never survived past their second mission. Every plane was doomed to crash or burn, except one. This old Yak-3, written off by everyone but one mechanic's mad gamble, went on to complete 18 bloody sorties, saving hundreds of lives. This is the hidden story of that mechanic's genius. In a small village on the outskirts of the Soviet Union, far from the roaring engines and skies of war, lived a young man named Petr Smirnov. From an early age, Petr was fascinated by machines. While other children played in the fields, he spent hours dismantling clocks, radios, and anything with gears and springs. His hands, though roughened by farm work, showed a rare precision and patience. When war erupted, Peter was barely out of his teens, but the call of duty was impossible to ignore. He enlisted not as a soldier, but as a mechanic, a guardian of the machines that would patrol the skies and protect his homeland. His dreams were simple: to keep the planes flying, to keep the pilots safe, and to survive the chaos that was sweeping through the world. The Eastern Front was brutal, and the stakes were high. Air battles raged daily, and the skies over the Soviet Union became a deadly chessboard. Among the many aircraft, the Yak-3 stood out, fast, agile, but delicate and demanding. Every mission pushed the machines to their limits. Breakdowns were common, and lives were lost not just in battle, but to mechanical failure. Peter quickly earned a reputation among his comrades. His intuition for engines was unparalleled. While others replaced part after part without understanding the root cause, Peter dug deeper. To him, every sound, every vibration was a message waiting to be decoded. But the war was not kind. Many planes under his care were lost, burnt, or torn apart. He felt the weight of every broken machine as if it were a fallen comrade. Yet, with every setback, his resolve only strengthened. One cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of blood-red light over the airfield, Peter watched a battered Yak-3 land limping home. Its engine coughed, its fuel tanks were scarred, and the pilot barely managed to keep it in the air. The bitter cold crept into every corner of the airfield. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of day when hope seemed as fragile as the frost-covered wings of the Yak-3. The once bold roar of engines was now punctuated by the grinding, smoky exhaust of damaged planes limping back. Each return was a battle won, but also a warning. Peter's hands were already stained with grease when the battered Yak-3 from the previous evening was wheeled into the hangar. The mechanics gathered around, whispering about the impossibility of saving this machine. It was old, patched up multiple times, and its fuel tanks showed signs of dangerous leaks. The pilot himself had been lucky to land it without setting the plane on fire. But Petr saw something others missed, a flicker of life beneath the ruin. Where others saw scrap, he saw a challenge worth facing. As night fell, the hangar grew quieter. Under the dim glow of a single flickering lamp, Peter began his work where the others hesitated to tread. He closely examined every wire, every pipe, every bolt that held this machine together. The clock was ticking. Another mission loomed, and there was no room for failure. Fuel leaks were the first enemy. They threatened to turn the plane into a blazing tomb at the slightest spark. Peter's solution was unconventional. He devised a method to reinforce the fuel tanks with an additional layer of protective lining using materials salvaged from discarded equipment. It was dangerous. No manual, no blueprints, just gut instinct and engineering skill. But fixing the fuel tanks was only part of the battle. The engine, strained beyond normal limits after countless sorties, held secrets of its own. Petr dismantled the cooling system, painstakingly cleaning every part, improvising a way to reduce overheating, a primary cause of engine failure threatening to ground the Yak for good. Day after day, he worked tirelessly, ignoring the chills and exhaustion. Each repair was a test of his dedication and skill. The other mechanics labeled him stubborn, even reckless, but Petr knew the cost of defeat: deaths in the air, pilots who would never return. His gamble was about to be put to the ultimate test. The next morning, the freshly repaired Yak-3 was cleared for flight. Peter stood near the runway, watching as the familiar shape climbed into the gray sky. His heart pounded. This wasn't just any test flight. It was the fragile hope of survival for the pilots and their machines. Flying higher and faster than ever before, the plane responded perfectly. The engine did not overheat. The fuel system held steady without a single drop leaking. For the first time in months, Peter saw a flicker of triumph in the eyes of the pilot returning safely. Word spread fast, rumors of the Yak-3 that shouldn't have flown again, a legend born from sweat, grease, and sheer will. But this victory was only the beginning. The war would throw more challenges at Peter, the machine, and the men who dared to believe they could outsmart death. The war continued to rage without mercy, and every day brought news of comrades lost and machines destroyed. Yet, in the chaos of repeated battles and desperate repairs, Peter's quiet determination never wavered. He knew that every successful mission was a miracle born from countless hours spent under the belly of a Yak-3, turning bolts, patching leaks, and breathing life into metal. One morning, as dawn bled into the eastern sky, an urgent alarm tore through the airfield. A nearby squadron had been ambushed, and immediate reinforcements were needed. The pilots scrambled into their planes, engines roaring to life with fierce urgency. Among them, the Yak-3 that Peter had risked everything to save stood ready, but its condition still hung by a thread. The aircraft was pushed to the brink on every sortie. This time, the damage it sustained was severe. Bullet holes riddled the wings, the cooling system was leaking, and the engine's usual cough worsened into a troubling wheeze. But there was no time to spare or alternatives to consider. The plane had to fly. Peter raced alongside the runway, his mind racing just as fast. Could the Yak hold together long enough? Would his repairs be enough to keep it in the air? The weight of every life depending on this fragile craft pressed heavily on him. For the first time, he feared that no amount of skill could outrun the brutal truth of war. In the skies above, the dogfight was relentless. Smoke, tracer rounds, and the thunder of engines filled the battlefield as pilots fought tooth and claw against the enemy. The battered Yak-3 dove and soared in dangerous maneuvers, the pilot pushing both machine and man beyond limits. Back on the ground, Peter's heart sank as he spotted the smoke plume rising far beyond the horizon. The Yak had taken a hit again. It was losing oil fast and sputtering. Yet, somehow, it held together, limping back like a wounded beast refusing to fall. When the pilot finally landed, exhausted and shaken, Peter was there waiting. The damage was worse than he feared, but the plane was still alive. That day marked a turning point, not just for the machine, but for Peter's reputation as the mechanic who refused to surrender. His repairs and ingenuity had not only saved one fighter, but rekindled hope in an entire unit. The war was far from over, but in the silent spaces between battles, Peter's relentless spirit burned as brightly as the engines he kept alive. Winter was settling over the airfield like a heavy, unrelenting shroud. The cold cut through everything, chilling the bones of men and machines alike. Nights stretched long and merciless, the bitter wind howling like a living thing around the battered hangars. For Petr Smirnov and the ground crew, these frozen nights brought no rest, only an endless stream of planes to repair, problems to solve, and lives to fight for. The most feared enemy wasn't the bullets or bombs that tore through the skies. It was fire. Not in battle, but in the very machines meant to protect their pilots. Fuel tanks damaged by enemy fire or worn thin with battle scars could erupt into lethal infernos at the slightest spark. Since the war began, this silent killer had doomed too many fighters and pilots. Peter knew this all too well. He had lost friends not to enemy planes, but to the blaze of those deadly fires. And with each loss, his determination strengthened. It was during one of those endless nights that Peter conceived a plan that many would later call madness. Using scraps of heat-resistant fabric scavenged from old parachutes, layers of discarded engine insulation, and a special sealing compound he formulated himself, Peter began reinforcing the Yak-3's fuel tanks. His modifications were unorthodox. Nobody had ever tried such methods in the field, and they came without guarantees or manuals. But he understood that desperate times demanded desperate measures. The other mechanics were skeptical. Some called it reckless tinkering. Others dismissed it as a pointless distraction from more urgent repairs. Command warned that any unauthorized modifications could lead to court-martial. But Peter's silent resolve was stronger than fear. Trials began. Each repaired Yak-3 was pressed back into service with Peter's protections in place, and each sortie became a test not only for the pilots, but for his innovation. Repeatedly, planes survived hits that previously would have meant certain death by fire. Yet the risk wasn't just mechanical. The frigid nights wore down even the strongest men. Peter found himself working long past midnight, freezing hands gripping tools as his breath crystallized in the icy air. His health began to falter. Exhaustion shadowed him like a silent enemy. Once, during a particularly brutal storm, Peter suffered frostbite in his fingers, but refused to stop until the last Yak-3 was ready. His comrades saw a man pushed beyond limits, tired, hardened, but unbroken. Amidst this struggle, Peter's determination inspired others. A quiet revolution among the ground crew began, with mechanics volunteering to aid his cause despite the risks. His mad idea started to spread. When a pilot later credited the reinforced Yak-3's fuel tanks with saving his life during a heated battle, whispers turned into gratitude. A legend was quietly growing in a frozen corner of the war. But the battle was far from won. Fuel fires remained deadly, and the enemy found new ways to target the vulnerable planes. For Peter, every mission was a gamble, and every night was a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Night falls again on the battered airfield, but this time, the atmosphere feels different. Peter Smirnov, exhausted but resolute, stands outside the hangar, staring into the dark sky where stars faintly pierce through the clouds. He's been pushing his limits for weeks now, risking everything, his health, his reputation, even his life, to keep those planes flying. Tonight, the war feels closer than ever. Rumors about the upcoming decisive battle have spread among the crew. The enemy is preparing to launch a massive offensive. If Peter's modifications hold, they might just make it through. But the nights are relentless, and so are the dangers. Peter's latest fix, a chain of improvised safety measures against fuel fires and engine failures, must be tested under the highest pressure. There's no room for failure. The pilots are counting on him just as he's counting on his own ingenuity. He recalls the first time he truly understood what was at stake. A young pilot, barely out of training, had crashed trying to land a plane damaged so badly that it should have been scrap. Peter had been the one to patch that plane with makeshift materials, knowing that if it had failed, the pilot wouldn't have another chance. That moment cemented his purpose, to save every aircraft, every pilot, every life. Tonight, he works through the dark, meticulously reinforcing the critical fuel lines and sealing the most vulnerable points. Every bolt, every patch must be perfect. The cold bites through his gloves, but he keeps going, knowing that the difference between life and death is measured in seconds, in millimeters of safety. Suddenly, a siren wails in the distance, an alert that an enemy fighter has been spotted nearby. The squadron's alert status jumps. Peter's heart races. He knows that at dawn, everything could change. A new attack, a rearranged front, a shattered hope. As the first light begins to creep over the horizon, he feels a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. His work might be small, his victory silent, but deep down, he knows he's done everything humanly possible. Tomorrow, those planes will take to the sky again. And if his repairs hold, if his risky modifications succeed, those fighters will fly further, faster, and safer. And maybe, just maybe, they will win. The dawn of the next day arrived cold and unforgiving. The airfield was abuzz with activity, every man prepared for what promised to be one of the fiercest aerial battles of the conflict. Aviators climbed into cockpits, mechanics performed last-minute checks, and Peter moved through the chaos with focused calm, double-checking the Yak-3 that bore his signature repairs. The sky darkened not with clouds, but with the wings of enemy fighters descending like a storm. The air filled with the deafening roar of engines and the sharp cracks of gunfire. It was the moment when all of Peter's sleepless nights and mad improvisations would be put to the ultimate test. As the Yak-3 charged into the fray, it became a desperate dance between life and death. Enemy tracers stitched the air, and explosions blossomed like deadly flowers in the sky. Several teammates did not return from their sorties, their planes shredded or engulfed in flames. But the Yak-3 kept flying. Its reinforced fuel tanks absorbed near misses that would have destroyed lesser ships. The engine, cooled by Peter's daring modifications, pushed harder than ever without seizing or overheating. The pilot, bearing scars of previous battles, wove through fire and smoke with the freedom only a reliable machine could grant. Back on the ground, Petter and the crew watched with bated breath. Time and again, the battered fighter reappeared on the horizon, returning battle-scarred but intact. Each survival was a victory, not just of metal and mechanics, but of human will against the merciless odds. When the final dogfight subsided, the cost was devastating. Friends lost, aircraft lost, but the Yak-3 that had been deemed too broken to fly had completed another 6 sorties that day, its legend growing with every heartbeat. Exhausted but triumphant, Petter realized the full weight of his role, not only as a mechanic, but as a guardian of hope. His work had bought lives, had held the line between survival and annihilation. The war was far from over, but in that inferno of flame and steel, a battered fighter had proven that sometimes survival wasn't luck. It was the product of endless grit, brilliance, and sacrifice. The days after the battle were heavy with silence, a stark contrast to the chaos just endured. Veterans returned, planes lay battered on the tarmac, and the weight of losses pressed on every soul at the airfield. But amid this fragile peace, Peter found no rest. The war's toll was creeping beyond the battlefield and into the very machines and minds tasked with survival. Though his reinforced Yak-3s had proven life-saving, signs of strain and fatigue grew impossible to ignore. Maintenance logs detailed failures that no patchwork could truly mend. Metal wore thin, seals weakened, and stealthy cracks formed beneath hurried repairs. The relentless pace of war was the enemy no mechanic could fully tame. More troubling still, beneath the hull of the beast, a quieter war of suspicion sparked among the ranks. The military command grew wary of Petter's methods. His modifications, innovative yet unorthodox, flew under the radar for months until failures happened and questions followed. In heated meetings, senior engineers challenged his work, declaring it risky to deviate from official procedures. Officers pressed him for explanations. Some accused him of reckless improvisation. Reports churned through the bureaucracy, and whispers of court-martial lingered in dark corners. Even some comrades began to doubt. The mechanic who once symbolized hope now stood dangling on the edge of disfavor. Friends who once cheered his genius now murmured about the dangers of playing with fire beyond authorized knowledge. Peter wrestled with the gnawing fear that his life's work might be undone by political tides. Yet the most piercing challenge was yet to come. A new wave of enemy weaponry emerged, incendiary bullets designed to ignite even reinforced fuel tanks. No material seemed safe enough. During one fierce air raid, several Yak-3s protected by Peter's innovations burst into flames near instantaneously. One such loss hit especially close, a dear friend and pilot whose last flight ended in fiery tragedy. Watching the plane burn, Peter's world seemed to fracture. How could his work fail when so many lives hung in the balance? Guilt clawed at him mercilessly, threatening to crush his spirit. But in the darkest nights, where doubt and despair threatened surrender, Peter found a flicker of stubborn resolve. He refused to be broken. He returned to the drawing board, refining, testing, and pushing the boundaries of material science and mechanical design. Each failure became a lesson etched into his determination. Quiet nights were now filled with experiments, sometimes alone in cold workshops while the war raged on outside. He sourced heat-resistant fabrics, experimented with new sealants, and consulted every available manual. His hands crafted improvements that no formal training had prepared him for. Slowly, his steadfast work rekindled hope among those who witnessed it. Disbelievers watched as planes started returning from missions with fewer losses to fire. Approval began to replace suspicion. Chapter 7 reveals the internal wars within war, battles against skepticism, guilt, and the limitations of the human spirit. It's a story not just of machines surviving war, but of a man fighting unseen fights to ensure they do. The chill of early morning gave way to a pale sun struggling to break through thick clouds, casting a cold light on the airfield where Petr Smirnov worked tirelessly. The weeks of doubt, fear, and relentless toil had shaped him, and the Yak-3s he had fought so fiercely to protect. News had arrived about an impending massive air offensive from the enemy. The entire regiment was to be deployed in what many called a moment of reckoning. Amid mounting pressure from command and the ever-present threat of failure, Peter's work was about to face the ultimate test. In the days leading to the assault, every creak and groan of machinery was inspected with surgical precision. Ground crews moved like clockwork, performing rapid repairs under the gaze of expectant pilots and officers. Peter oversaw the final round of enhancements on several aircraft, including his own prized Yak-3. Inside the cramped workshop, Peter worked side by side with his fellow mechanics, sharing ideas and refining solutions. This was no longer a solitary struggle. Many now recognized that raw talent and innovation were difficult to suppress when they meant survival. When the dawn of battle broke, the sky erupted with a furious symphony of engines, gunfire, and explosions. The Yak-3s soared into the inferno, their reinforced frames a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. Throughout the conflict, the modified fighters took heavy hits, but returned time after time. Onlookers noted that the planes resisted fires more effectively, and engines pushed beyond previous limits. The pilot who flew Peter's Yak recounted dodging what should have been fatal strikes, grateful for the additional seconds his machine had bought. For the first time, results silenced skeptics and gave hope to a battered regiment. Command hailed the survival rate as a turning point, making official what had been whispered in the hangars. Peter's innovations were saving the war. Yet, victory came with its price. The psychological toll on Peter was immense. Each successful sortie was shadowed by memories of those who hadn't survived. Quiet nights were filled with reflection, and the weight of responsibility pressed like iron chains. But through exhaustion and grief, Peter found a renewed sense of purpose, a conviction that even in the darkest times, human creativity and willpower could carve paths to survival and triumph. Chapter 8 stands as the story's pivotal moment, where perseverance overcomes doubt, innovation shapes destiny, and a lone mechanic's courage helps turn the tide of war. In the wake of the fiercest battles, the airfield was a landscape of both triumph and tragedy. Broken Yak-3s lay scattered like fallen soldiers, their metal bodies twisted and charred, reminders of the cost paid in the skies. Among the men, a somber hush settled, broken only by the steady rhythm of repairs and the faint murmur of grief shared in solemn corners. Peter Smirnov bore the invisible scars of loss every bit as deep as the shattered planes. For every Yak-3 his hands had saved, several more had been lost, engulfed by fire or torn apart by enemy fire. Faces of friends and pilots haunted his thoughts. Each name was a ghost that whispered in the cold wind. The cost of valor was a heavy burden. It manifested not only in the machines destroyed, but in the souls left behind, shaken but unbowed. Peter carried survivors' guilt like a shadow. It was a quiet torment that no gauge or manual could measure. The friends who never returned, the battles lost despite ingenuity, weighed on his conscience harder than any physical injury. Yet, amid this sorrow, Peter found strength, fortitude renewed by purpose. He began training a new generation of mechanics, sharing every lesson learned in the crucible of war. His teachings were not just technical, but philosophical. How every bolt tightened, every repair made, mattered, not just to machines, but to lives. The men listened, inspired by the humility and determination that had steeled their mentor's character. Their camaraderie deepened, a lifeline in the relentless war, binding them in shared sacrifice. Together, they faced a brutal reality. Victory required more than bravery. It demanded relentless endurance and unyielding hope. During harsh winter nights, Peter often reflected quietly on the cruel irony of his situation. A man who rebuilt planes to save lives, yet who felt powerless against the waves of loss washing over him. Still, he pressed forward, driven by the belief that every saved plane meant one less death, one more story to be told. The war's shadow lengthened, but within it, Peter's legacy took root, a silent testament to the unseen heroism behind the roar of engines and crack of gunfire. The narrative of battle was not only written on the skies, but forged in the hands of those who kept hope alive, piece by piece. The war's final echoes faded into a somber peace, leaving behind a world forever changed. Peter Smirnov, once a nameless figure among countless mechanics, now stood quietly at the crossroads of history, his work completed, but his journey far from over. The Yak-3, once battered and deemed beyond repair, had flown mission after mission, its survival a miracle of determination and ingenuity. Yet, recognition was elusive. The headlines belonged to pilots and generals, while mechanics like Peter labored in the shadows, their stories largely untold. Peter accepted this anonymity with quiet grace. The true reward was the lives saved, the missions completed, and the knowledge passed down. In the post-war years, he devoted himself to training future generations, ensuring that hard-earned lessons would not be lost to time. The world outside moved on, but Peter's memories remained vivid, of frozen nights bent over engines, of comrades lost, of victories born from sweat and sacrifice. The war had taken much, but it also taught enduring truths about resilience, ingenuity, and the quiet power of dedication. Years later, a modest plaque was placed at the former airbase, a small tribute to a man who defied odds and fire to keep planes flying. Few knew his full story, but among those who did, Peter Smirnov became a symbol of the unsung heroes whose hands shaped history. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over empty runways, Peter stood watching, content in the knowledge that true heroism often lies not in glory, but in the enduring spirit to fight when no one is watching.